I grew up in the deep Southwest, San Diego, California. And I've sort of made a gradual trip up to the Pacific Northwest. I lived in Los Angeles for a little while. I lived in San Francisco for most of the 1990s, then moved here in 2000. So I've been here now coming almost 23 years. And I love Portland. It answers a lot of my needs as a musician and as an outdoors enthusiast. The first band I played in was called Flashback, and it was a rock band. I was 17 years old. I had performed prior to that in the junior high school jazz band. My first experience performing was in fourth grade. I played saxophone and got to do a solo on Arlo Leach, which is also synonymous with Love Me Tender, or if you're familiar with the song. So that would be my first experience in playing a band. But the camaraderie you feel with playing with other musicians really happened when I was 17. And we played classic rock when it wasn't classic yet. This was back in the late 70s, early 1980s. We did everything from Black Sabbath and Jimi Hendrix to Van Halen and AC/DC, all the different kinds of the same thing. I was really into Jimi Hendrix at the time, so part of our show, I would play the Star Spangled Banner with my teeth. And do all kinds of crazy feedback. And I begged my parents for an electric guitar for a long time, and I finally got one. And then they refused to get me an amplifier. And their reasoning was that they thought if I got an amplifier that I would get into a band, and if I got into a band, I would get into drugs. And of course, I didn't have the heart to tell them that I didn't need to be in a band to do all that. But I loved playing loud. I was really so into the loud rock and roll. When they finally did buy me an amp, every time my mom left to go to the store or something, I would go in my room and just crank it up, to the point where Mrs. Smith, the elderly lady who lived 5 houses down, said she couldn't hear her television whenever my mom left to go to the store. I was in rock bands for a long time, and then I sort of got bit by the jazz bug. And then when I moved to San Francisco in 1992, I bought an upright bass. I started taking bass lessons from this guy, and decided that because he was an upright bass player, that I really wanted to play upright bass. And he was a jazz player, and so that was an influence. And something magical happens when you buy an upright bass. All of a sudden, everyone wants you to play in their band. And so I immediately got into 2 bands. I got into one band called Lost Wax Process that was headed up by a guy named Adam Levy, who actually went on to become Norah Jones's guitar player. I was way over my head in that band, by the way. They were all really great jazz players, and I was just sort of learning. But the other band that I got into was called Jimbo, Trout, and the Fish People. And that was upright bass, a guy who played washboard and harmonica, and a guy who played ragtime jug band style guitar. And that was my first exposure to jug band style music. And I fell in love with it. We played a variety of stuff from, Duke Ellington to old, Charlie Poole, folk music, as jug bands did. Jug bands played everything. What they weren't limited to any particular style. They played all the music of the day, usually. And so that's what we did. We would play, like, I'm Beginning to See the Light from Duke Ellington, or we would play Columbus Stockade Blues, or Roll on the ground, boys, roll on the ground, eat soda crackers and roll on the ground. Jimbo, the guitar player, who was the main singer in that band, had a list of hundreds of songs that he could play. A lot of old folk songs, similar to what you would hear a lot of jug bands and folk bands play, would be considered standards in the folk realm. And then, the occasional jazz number that might have been considered, a pop song of the time. Nowadays, we would maybe consider it more of a jazz standard, like maybe Georgia on My Mind, or, one of these songs that today jazz players will pull out of the hat and go, hey, let's play this, standard. Prior to that, I've always been a songwriter. And at that time, I was playing sort of 6-string guitar, doing sensitive singer-songwriter style stuff. And when I discovered Fats Waller and Hoagy Carmichael and all these great songwriters from the 1930s that used humor in their music, and it was a lot of levity. It was during the Depression, and so people were having tough times. And I think a lot of music was really funny on purpose. It was to bring people up and make them enjoy life a little bit more. And so at that point, I decided that I went from a sensitive singer-songwriter to an insensitive singer-songwriter, and started writing music with funny lyrics and just a little bit more humor and joy in them, and double entendre. And in that band, Jimbo, Trout, and the Fish People, Jimbo, a great guitar player and singer, was also a street musician, and he was also interested in traveling. And so one day he said, hey, let's go to Europe. And I was like, and what? He's like, well, just go busking, we'll play on the streets. And I was like, I had never done anything like that before. I'd never been, to Europe. And I thought, wow, that's crazy, kind of. But we did it. We went over to Europe, played on the streets, and we made easily enough money playing on the streets to pay for a hostel and food. And we eventually went around Germany, and we got a gig at a nightclub, opening up for another band with some friends that we knew. And at that time, a German record label saw us and said, hey, we want to put one of your songs on a compilation CD. And then after that, they said, hey, we'd like to do a whole record with you, and we'll, set you up with a booking agent, and you can tour. And so we ended up doing 2 subsequent tours around mostly Germany. We also went to the Czech Republic and Poland and the Netherlands. At the time, in the 90s, this was around 95, something like that. An American folk musician could go to Europe and tour around and actually make a living doing that. The arts culture in Europe would put a lot more money into the arts than we do here. In fact, someone told me at one time that the city of Berlin puts more money into the arts than the whole national endowment in the United States. The government would sponsor clubs to bring touring acts from other countries. And so there would be times when we would play a club to, 6 people. And at the end of the night, they'd go, okay, here's 500 Deutschmarks. Thanks so much. And we hope you come back. And we were like, and they would give us a hotel room and, breakfast and dinner. Occasionally we would run into other bands that were similar. Not that often, though. There was a pretty healthy folk music circuit in Germany at the time. We have a friend, Pat Thomas, who ran a label, Heyday Records. They came out with this sort of seminal compilation called Hit Me With a Flower. That record label brought a lot of folk musicians to Europe during that period of time. We came back from Europe. We were still based out of San Francisco, and we would do, tours up and down the coast to different spots. We go up to Seattle or go, I think one point we made it all the way down to San Diego to play. But most of the stuff that we did was just centered around San Francisco. We would play a lot of bars and small clubs. And it took a while, in the Bay Area, there's, 4,000 bands trying to play in the same 50 clubs. So it takes a while, but, we would eventually get to the point where we were, playing, 2, 3, 4 days a week, nights a week, or, and other gigs, park gigs and other things. And so sometimes private events, but it stayed pretty busy, actually. My dad had given me an old tenor guitar, and so I started writing songs on the tenor guitar. And right around that time, I had a friend who knew I was playing tenor guitar and writing songs on tenor guitar. He was actually one of the brewers at Anchor Steam Brewery and a great slide guitar player. He played in country and bluegrass bands and played lap steel guitar. And he called me up one day and said, "Hey, I've got this old National guitar and I've got to pay my taxes. You want to buy it from me?" And I was like, "Well, I don't have a whole lot of money, but I'll come and look at it." And I came and played it, and we worked out a price. I ended up not paying as much as he wanted for it, but he made me promise that if I was ever going to sell it, that I would sell it back to him. So I was like, okay. And that sort of is what got me started. And I ended up taking that guitar, and at that point, I became a busker. I would go into the subways in the Bay Area and just play on the street wherever I could. And that led to meeting a few other musicians, and I ended up starting a band called The Wags, which was me playing my tenor National guitar and upright bass, and then my other friend Scotty played snare drum and trombone. We as a trio kept going until about 1999, and then I decided that I was going to move to Portland, and the drummer, trombone player, Scotty, also moved to Portland. The bass player stayed in San Francisco, but he would come up every couple months and we would do shows here in Portland. So that band lasted for a while, and we would hire soloists occasionally to come in and play with us, different soloists. And I had, at my birthday party, I threw a birthday party, and I was sort of involved in the old time music scene at the time. And at my birthday party, I invited Caleb Clowder and Sammy Lynn from the Foghorn String Band to come play. And then a bunch of people from that scene came to play, the bluegrass and old time scene. This is in, I want to say 2002. And one of the people that came was Lisa Marcicek, who has Miz Kitty's Parlor, the show that has been running for a long time here in Portland. And she brought her partner at the time, Jason Wells. He was just getting into playing the trumpet, cornet, and flugelhorn, and he would go to jams. He said he would bring the flugelhorn to bluegrass jams. He called it fluegrass. But we met at my birthday party, and we just really connected with each other, and we both expressed that we had this great love for old-time jazz and early music like that. So I decided I really wanted to play music with him, and so I invited him to play with my band, The Wags, and he came and did a gig with us. As I mentioned, he was sort of just really getting into playing the cornet and trumpet, and so he didn't have a ton of experience. And after the gig, I asked my bandmates, I said, hey, I really like this guy. Can we, invite him to play? And they were both, well, we don't know. He's not a top-notch player, really, and we really want to play with a top-notch player, and so they kind of poo-pooed the idea. And so at that point, I decided, well, I want to play with Jason, so I'm just going to start a new band that I can play with Jason in. And I had been playing in a bunch of bluegrass bands, and after touring with my upright bass, I had trashed my upright bass pretty bad, and I took it to the luthier, and she had it for a year doing repairs on it. And it cost me several $1,000s to get it back. And so I thought, well, gee, can I make a bass that sounds good, that's cheap, and I can make it and I can repair it? And that's what brought me to washtub basses, and that started my whole journey into homemade instruments. I came up with the tub bass. I had done a lot of research about them, and the original tub bass, as you know, the string on a stick where you pull the stick to change the tension and the note. I tried that, and it's just really difficult to get exact notes. And the type of music I wanted to play required more precision. And so I discovered that what some people were doing was they were making a stationary stick and using wire or something, a metal string, that you could play up and down the stick and get exact notes. And once I discovered that, I was like, wow, this is great, you know. And so I started developing this type of tub bass, and it ended up sounding really good. You know, it filled the role of the bass. It was loud enough. It was as loud as an upright bass, and it sounded good. It had a pretty warm sound, and you could hit exact notes with it. And so I had done that, and I was sitting in my basement at one time, and I just had this sort of, it was almost a laugh. I thought, you know, what if I could make, you know, a homemade instrument band? Ha ha ha, wouldn't that be funny? You know, you know, a banjo out of a trash can too, you know? And I just thought of it as a joke, but I ended up making a banjo out of a trash can, and it ended up sounding good. That was right at the point where I had met Jason, and I said, well, look, you know, I've got this idea. I built a banjo out of a trash can. I built a bass out of a, you know, trash can. At the time, I had actually built some out of tubs, and then I started going to trash cans. Let's start this band. And I had another friend who was all in, and he decided, he was a slide guitar player, and so he took a little wash tub and made a slide guitar out of it. And that was the birth of Trashcan Joe. At the time, it was all homemade instruments except for the cornet. And Jason used to say, well, I've got a trashy style, so that kind of fits in fits in with all that. And I have done a few gigs as a trio where it would be like washboard, trash can banjo, and washed up bass or trash can bass, and that is entirely homemade instruments. And so that, you know, that really answered, you know, scratched that itch. There has been maybe once or twice when I wasn't at the gig. I just said, okay, go ahead, do it without me. And you know, it isn't technically really Trashcan Joe without the Trashcan Joe there, which is how Trashcan Joe got our name, a Trashcan Joe, and we just changed the inflection to Trashcan Joe. Eventually, the slide player moved to Hood River, and we replaced him with Mike Danner, who plays accordion, and he still is in the band, the core band, myself and Jason Wells and Mike Danner. We've had two different washboard players. It started out with Kirsten Pixton, and now it's Jen Forte who plays the washboard. We had Chuck Massey was the bass player, and I built a bass for him. And our current bass player, and will probably be our bass player for a long, long time, maybe forever, is Matty Voth. And he's been the bass player for several years now. We've been through actually many, many bass players through the 20 years that we have been a band. That's probably 6 or 7 different bass players. For a time there, we would keep a bass player for 2 or 3 years, and then they'd be sick of us, and then and be like, all right, we got to find a new bass player. And each time I would have to, you know, build a bass for that person to, you know, and say, hey, okay, you know, I want you to play this trash can thing. And they would be sometimes reluctant at first, but once they started playing it, they would be like, well, you know, this thing sounds great. How fun, you know? And I've probably made 30 or 40 basses. I've gotten many commissions to make them. So, and I've had people copy my designs too. It's you know, which is the way it should be. You know, it's folk art. This little one here is sort of the design that I used for trash can basses, and that became sort of the standard model. And so I would have, throughout playing gigs and stuff, people would come up and like, oh my gosh, can you make me a bass? And so I've done many, many commissions on the bass. They're pretty straightforward and easy to make for me. I mean, I've actually had people ask me to make them trash can banjos too, which is, that's a lot. That's a lot of work. I've only made 4 of those. The trash can is, one thing. I do like making, I'll show you these other ones, out of fruitcake tins and biscuit tins, and basically anything that can sort of hold a structure inside that will support a neck and some kind of resonator cone for the tone producer. The music that we play in Trashcan Joe started out about half cover tunes and half original music. The original music was sort of influenced by the stylistically by the cover tunes that we were playing, but we would play songs from, Fats Waller, like Sit Right Down and Write Myself a Letter, or Jason, our cornet player, has an affinity for movie theme music. He also is a big fan of film and Stanley Kubrick, so he would play music from some of the Kubrick films. Songs like "We'll Meet Again," that was from. I'll think of it probably later. It was from a big Kubrick film, but so songs like that. Mike Danner brought in some more blues-oriented songs like "You Got to Know How." Fish and Blues and stuff of that sort. So it's been an influence of early jazz music. Trashcan Joe tended to lean more on the early jazzy side than the folk side, although that we do include some folk music. And I also include some of my more folky, jug bandy songs that I write into that. And those songs are range from more on the jazzy side to more on the 3-chord folky side with some, double entendre and humor involved. And so, yeah, a variety. The traditional jazz songs, I got exposed to a lot of them when I was playing with Jimbo, Trout, and the Fish People. A lot of those artists like Hoagie Carmichael and Duke Ellington and Fats Waller, I hadn't really heard of before playing in that band. And when I started playing that music and I realized how much I loved it, as you know, you can go down a big old wormhole with all that stuff, and there is a plethora of material out there and resources. I also developed a pretty significant 78 record habit, which I probably have about 1,500 78 records. And just like music today, 80% of them are garbage, and every once in a while you run across a real gem. And maybe not 80%, but a lot of them were just, typical music of the day that was, what they would find something that was popular and then they would make a bunch of music like it. Same thing that happens today, really. But through just listening to a lot of records, I would find a lot of really cool music. And the nice thing about 78 Records is that, while there is much of it has been documented, you can still find music that maybe nobody's put out again, that might be that, just rare song that no one else has heard in a long, long time, and so that's a real fun source for it. But, the internet, the way it is today, there's so much resource, available to anyone who wants to research any specific artist or jug band artist. And, a lot of stuff that I got also came from CDs, the reissue CDs like Gannon's Jug Stompers or, any of those number of jug bands that got reissued. Some of the compilation reissues were great. I got one that's called Hard Times Come Again No More, which has just 30 different jug bands on there with different music on it. One of the things about this band, and one of the reasons I started it also, is my previous band, the Wags, I was the lead singer, songwriter, frontman, and I wanted to start a band that I was not always the main focus, which is great with Trashcan Joe because, we currently have a 5-piece lineup and everybody sings lead, everybody writes music, everybody is a good quality singer. And so basically when we do a gig, we take turns. The core of it is the three, Jason, Mike, and I. We do most of the singing, of lead singing anyway. And so during a typical set, we'll just keep going around taking turns singing lead. And then we'll have our washboard player, Jen, will sing a song, maybe one song a set. And our bass player, Matty Voth, will sing a song, maybe once in a gig or so. He has an original tune that he plays with us. One of the songs that our cornet player, Jason, will do is from the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and it's called Pure Imagination. And he'll sing that song, and when it comes to the solo break, he'll run out into the audience and disappear. And we're playing solos, and we're like, we don't know where Jason is. Sometimes they'll go, hey, we're auditioning new trumpet players, if anybody wants to come up. And when the chorus comes around, magically he'll appear out of nowhere, and if you want to hear paradise, and sometimes it's just the crowd loves it, and it's just a great performance piece. And Jason is sort of the one who is consistently always able to just take it to the next level, and he's such a great entertainer. Shoehorn, who is a great local Portland artist who plays saxophone and tap dances at the same time, has played with Trashcan Joe off and on pretty much over most of our career. He's never been one of the main members, but he is typically one of the first people I call if one of my members can't make it. Like if the cornet player can't make it, I'll call Shoehorn. He's an amazing entertainer, and he's an amazing musician. Jason, our cornet player, is also sort of our resident ham. He's very charismatic, and he really has a great ability to entertain. And so it's big shoes to fill if he's not there. And so oftentimes that's why I'll call Shoehorn, because he also just raises the entertainment bar wherever he is involved. When we first started out, like most bands, we were scrapping to play whatever gig we could get. And then we sort of lucked out early on to get a regular weekly gig at the Moon and Sixpence, which is a bar here in Portland. And that was a great opportunity, really, because, playing once a week really makes you tight as a band. We've never been really big on rehearsing, so just having a regular gig that was very casual was perfect for that, because oftentimes if someone had a new song, we would just bring it to the gig. And people are there to talk and have a conversation and eat and drink, and they're not 100% focused on the band. The band is more ambience for that particular situation. We ended up doing 8 years of Wednesdays at the Moon and Sixpence. When we finally stopped doing it, it was almost weird. It's like, well, it's Wednesday night. What am I going to do with myself now? But the only negative that came out of that is that if we had a gig on the weekend that we were trying to get people to come to, it was often hard to get people to come to it because they knew they could see us for free every Wednesday. But we have done, in addition to that, we've played the Seattle Folklight Festival, we've played at Oregon Country Fair, Burning Man several times. We played at the Roseland Theater for Candidates Gone Wild, the Livewire radio show at the Aladdin Theater, One of our songs ended up on a CD that they produced. We played Pickathon. We were at one of the early ones. I think we played in 2002 or 2003 at Horning's Hideout for that festival. And then and we have a song on one of their compilation releases. And then we also played at Pickathon in, I think it was 2007 or 2008 when they moved to Pendarvis Farm. I want to say 3 years ago, just before the pandemic hit, we played on the kids stage. We also developed a program for young audiences. So we go into the schools, elementary schools predominantly, and we have a show specifically scripted that basically we go in and we talk about all the homemade instruments and how you can make music on anything, and you don't need anything, an expensive musical instrument. And we get the kids to come up and play on tin cans and stuff with us, and so we ended up taking that show to the children's stage at Pickathon about 3 years ago. We did a lot of playing for the swing dance music scene. That actually was great for us when, it's still a popular scene, but the Secret Society Ballroom became a real great haven for swing dance music, and they would hire a lot of swing dance bands regularly. The Portland Lindy Society and these other swing dance associations would, fill the place with dancers, and so that was a great space for us. Since then, that has now closed, unfortunately, but we've also played smaller places, the Alberta Street Pub, and now a new place, the Alberta Abbey, which is a large venue. We did our 20-year anniversary show there. And most recently, the Alberta Rose Theatre, which we were involved with the Rose City Circus as their support band, and we had a couple sold out shows there. So we love playing all styles and all, different size venues, even just little things. We do a lot of private gigs. But it's really fun to play the big venues when you get a nice big crowd, and we feel like we can really put out our original music and some of the stuff that's a little bit more listener oriented when we play some of those big venues, especially for the swing dancers. They want to hear mid-tempo swing, mid-tempo swing, mid-tempo swing, and you can go a little bit faster, a little bit slower, but they just kind of want something they can dance to. So as a dance band, you are a little bit limited in, what you're expected to play. And there has been times where we were just kind of punk about it and refused to play any dance numbers, and we're like, here, try this one on size. You can't dance to it, but but like I said, some of the larger venues, and when we get to do showcase shows, then we really like it. For instance, like at Oregon Country Fair, when we perform there, and we've been performing there for the last almost 20 years. When we get on a stage like that, we can really bring out our original music and not necessarily the stuff that's just for dancing, but the stuff that would maybe be more for listening. This most recent thing that we did at the Alberta Rose Theatre supporting the circus acts were phenomenal. And I suppose the hardest thing about doing a gig like that is paying attention to playing the music, because you find yourself watching and you're just awestruck, and then all of a sudden I don't know where I'm at, or what's going on. Oh, the song, that's right, we're performing. So those have always been great experiences. We have actually done a lot of work backing up circus acts. So it started with Kazoom, who were acro balancers. And then we also did stuff with Tommy Twimble, who is another local performer who does comedy and acting and physical comedy. And so we have done shows with him. Miz Kitty's Parlor is put on by Miz Kitty, Lisa Marsasek, and I believe she's been doing it for now 20 years. Gosh, she has just really done a great job at creating a vaudeville style show. Just like the old vaudeville shows, acts will come on and do 10 or 15 minute performances and then go off, and then there'll be something else. And so she'll have musicians, puppeteers, maybe a comedian or an acting style performance. Just a variety. It's a variety show. Our first show as Trashcan Joe was at one of the first Miz Kitty performances ever. It was October of 2002. We had just gotten together as a band, and I don't even think we had the name Trashcan Joe yet, because on the poster, I have the original poster from the Miz Kitty show, and she billed us as James Cook, the manipulator of the Trashcan Joe. We've played many times, of course, over the years. We did our 10-year anniversary show at the Mission Theater at one of her vaudeville shows. And yeah, what a great lady, and what a great thing she's done for music in Portland, because she's got a great following just for her show. People will go just to her show because even if they don't recognize the artist, they know that she does a great job of curating it. And so it's always guaranteed to be entertaining. I myself am also currently the bass player in her house band. So that's a different band, but we do the support, play in between the acts, play before the show, and the intermission, you know, and close out the show. You know, in the jazz scene and the swing dance scene, there's a lot of crossover between bands. So, like for instance, I used to play in a band, the Joe Baker Band, and prior to that, it was the High Water Jazz Band. And I played with people who would also play in Pink Lady and the Tramps, or the Libertine Bells, or the Midnight Serenaders, the John Bennett Jazz Band. He's now passed away. A lot of those bands had sort of interchangeable players. It's funny, there's a bass player in town, Bernardo Gomez, one of my favorite bass players, and I had heard about him for years and never met him, because whenever he couldn't do a gig, I would sub for him on bass, and whenever I couldn't do a gig, he would sub for me on bass. And so we knew about each other for years. And then we finally met, and of course he's a fabulous guy and a fabulous musician. But that's just kind of how the music scene, in the jazz scene especially, you know, in the swing dance and jazz and swing jazz scene is, there's just, you know, if you need a musician, you hire one, and a lot of the music is either familiar, or they'll have musical charts that you can read at the gig, and so yeah, there's just a lot of that going on. It's very, I guess the word incestuous is probably not too bad to use. I can't say I'm lacking in, you know, great gigs that we've done over the years. You know, we have done some really fun gigs at big venues. A dream would be to maybe get to the point where I could tour around at a higher level. The touring that I've done at this point has been, you know, sleeping on floors and doing that kind of thing. So, you know, a tour where I was playing at bigger venues to crowds that knew who we were. But anymore, for most of us in the band, it's just more about the music, just making quality music and enjoying what we do. And we all really enjoy it. Obviously, we've been doing it a long, long time. So we're just going to continue. I will play in this band until I'm dead. Jason and I are the original members that are still in the band. Mike Danner is one of the newer members. He's only been in it for like 15 or 16 years now. And Jen Forty has been with us probably, I don't know, 6 years, 7 years, and same with Matty Voth. He's been with the band maybe 5, 6, 7 years now. It's hard to remember. But the band, as it is now, has been together for a good amount of time, and I don't see it changing really from what the current lineup is, although you just never know. Things happen. It's a good track record just for having a band. You know, I don't think, prior to that, I had a band for about 8 years. That was the Wags, and that was the longest. And prior to that, I think 2 to 3 years was really the longest I was able to keep a band together before it just sort of imploded or people didn't get along anymore. You know, but 20 years, that's pretty good, going on 21. The band's almost old enough to drink. It's been a wonderful journey, and I truly am blessed as a musician to be able to play with such great people. You know, over the years, there's been so many different scenarios, and, you know, a lot of times some of the most talented musicians are the most difficult. But this band is sort of bucked all the trends, and we have this great collection of extremely talented, extremely entertaining musicians who are also just great people. And we all get along, and we all are very supportive of each other, and I think we all enjoy it so much that it just, I couldn't imagine it being better. The whole homemade instrument thing started with this bass. This is Ernestine Tub, and it's an upright double tub. And the concept was having a tub bass that had a stationary neck that had a string that you could play up and down the neck. And so you can play exact notes on it, and that allows you to play complex music. You know, I can play some jazz. Or folk music. But this, and I'm just going to take you through the evolution of the bass here. This ended up developing into something more with a can. Now this bass is actually an old 50-pound lard can. I think it's vegetable shortening actually, but it's kind of funner to think of it as lard. And the cans have a little bit deeper sound, and so you know, this just got used for that. I also use trash cans. Anything that has a pleated top like this is sort of like a speaker, and that will vibrate and have a tone. And so I've used anything with that kind of top. For instance, I've made them out of small trash cans, and they sound a little bit quieter and have less bass the smaller they are. But this is a 10-gallon can. I also make basses out of 20-gallon cans, which are the most popular, and 30-gallon cans for a big bass. This was just an experiment because I wanted a bass that would be able to be carried, and so it's a gas can bass. And it has pretty good tone. It's a little quiet, so I put a pickup on it. It's got a pickup, and it can plug into an amplifier. So that, this is nice for you know, different kinds of live gigs when you want to bring a bass that maybe fits a little bit more easily into the car or something like that. So after inventing or coming up with that idea for this bass, the next thing was building a banjo, and that's when I came up with the Trashcan Joe, which is the bottom 4 inches of a trash can, a 10-gallon trash can. The lid is on the back, and then I used a banjo neck. And a little bit out of tune, but it uses a National resonator cone in the interior for the tone producer. And I put the handle here as a hand rest. But this is what started the band Trashcan Joe. It's a Trashcan Joe, a banjo made out of a trash can. And so it was one of the easiest bands to name because, you know, I figured, well, you know, there it is. It's a banjo made out of a trash can. Since making this, I have come up with, well, here is the 5-string version of it, which I'm not much of a 5-string player. Well, I don't know if that's in tune even. Anyway, it's more for trashy bluegrass. Then I decided to make a few different styles. This is the biscuitar. It's made out of a biscuit tin, and this one has some features like there's a little eraser there in case you make a mistake. This is an optical compressor. It's got you know, other features, but this has the distinction of it's got a nice old Vega banjo neck on it that when I wasn't paying attention, my young puppy decided was going to chew on the tip of it. So the teeth marks are still there. But this has got some pretty scenes on it too. I would try to pick things that could be used as bodies that look neat. This is the fruitcake canjo, because this is an old Hostess fruitcake tin. And it's got a good... And it utilizes actually a ukulele resonator cone from National Guitar. And it's got a violin tailpiece here as the tailpiece, and a drawer pull from one of the big box stores for the protector there and for the hand. And then, like most, I use an old found banjo neck that just, you know, you can find them used occasionally on eBay or something. And then this one is a electric cookie canjo. So I put a pickup in it, and it's solid body. So it needs to be plugged in, so it doesn't make a lot of sound without it. And this design, this motif, is from an English plate maker, Copeland Spode. And I actually have a plate that matches this. I can bring it out and show you in a minute. But this design, it was called the Tower design. And so you can buy whole sets of plates, of antique plates that have this design on it. And even cups and saucers and you know, all kinds of stuff. So that's kind of beautiful. I love that. This small thing is the Popeye kazoo. I just made it so you could, you know, have it like that. It's very loud, and you can play it. The main thing is you can play it while you're playing something else. Anyway, kazoo. You know what a washboard is. Everybody knows what a washboard is. I don't really need to play it, but I have played this thing for years, and this is, of course, got little trashy man on the top. and typical things that you would find on a washboard. In some of the early days of Trashcan Joe, we had another guitar player playing with us, and so I would sometimes play washboard. And then one of the more extravagant things that I built is a cigar box violin, and this is made out of an old Antonio e Cleopatra cigar box. But the cigar box itself is made out of quarter sawn cedar, which is actually a decent tone wood. And so I'll give you an idea of what that sounds like. This instrument was actually played by a really talented violinist, Ben Brooks, who played at one of the first pickathons with us. And so I believe it actually made it onto the recording. I'm not much of a violin player, but you can see how it sounds. It does play just like a violin. It's got a full size. I put an old violin neck on there, and it actually has a sound post and a bass bar on the inside that would be just like a normal violin. Once again, I'm not a violin player, but I thought I would be at one point, so I figured, well, I better make a homemade instrument like that. The only other thing over here is the canopy and the lamprophone, and I built this to be a portable PA system. It can plug in, but it also has a battery, and then I took a microphone and put it into a lamp, and so that I would have. Whoops, it's going to feed back on me, but. Check 1 2 1 2, and so I would use this as a live music setup when we would play at bar gigs, something like that. So yeah, the lamprophone and the canopy. It's about to feed back, so I'll turn it off. But there you go. That's all my shit in a nutshell.
That's fun.
Yeah. My partner Farron is a very talented mask maker, and these are great blue heron masks. This was the one that I wore, and this is the one that she wore for Mardi Gras. She is from New Orleans, and so she really loves the Mardi Gras traditions, and so this was a few years back. She made these 2 masks for us to go to the Mardi Gras ball.